It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. The look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved Charlotte. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very people who fought to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the whispers seemed too vague to take seriously. Royal households are built on discretion, and private meetings happen every day without attracting attention. Yet this meeting felt different from the very beginning. It brought together Catherine, Prince William, and a select group of medical advisors behind closed doors at a time when the royal calendar appeared unusually quiet. There was no official announcement, no carefully prepared statement, no reassuring words from palace officials. Instead, there was silence. And inside royal circles, silence often speaks louder than any public declaration. Those closest to the family reportedly noticed the shift almost immediately. Staff members who normally moved with confidence suddenly became cautious with their words. Engagement schedules were quietly adjusted. Certain conversations stopped the moment unfamiliar faces entered the room. It was not the kind of behavior associated with a routine matter. Something significant had happened, and those tasked with protecting the monarchy were working overtime to keep it from becoming public knowledge. The concern centered on Princess Charlotte. Early reports pointed toward what insiders described as a sudden health development, though details remained tightly guarded. The lack of information only fueled speculation. Questions spread through palace offices, private residences, and eventually among foundation staff who had begun noticing subtle changes weeks earlier. While no one could fully explain what was happening, many sensed that a serious issue was unfolding beneath the surface. The atmosphere surrounding the family had changed, and even experienced royal observers struggled to ignore it. Then came the moment that intensified every rumor. Catherine was seen leaving the private meeting looking visibly shaken. Those who encountered her afterward described a woman carrying a burden she could not yet share. For years, she had built a reputation for calmness under pressure, navigating public scrutiny with remarkable composure. Yet this time seemed different. The strain was impossible to completely hide. It was not a dramatic display. It did not need to be. Sometimes the smallest signs reveal the deepest concerns, and people noticed. Later that evening, another detail emerged. William was reportedly seen spending time with Charlotte in a manner that caught the attention of those around him. The future king has always been regarded as a devoted father, but witnesses described an unusual tenderness and protectiveness. It was the kind of interaction that appeared ordinary on the surface while carrying a deeper emotional weight underneath. For many insiders, it reinforced the growing belief that whatever was happening involved far more than routine family matters. As days passed, royal insiders began quietly admitting that something had felt unusual for weeks. Certain appearances had been adjusted. Some engagements had been scaled back. Catherine's reduced visibility at several foundation-related commitments had prompted concern among staff, members who worked closely with her charitable initiatives. Initially, those absences were explained away as scheduling changes. But when viewed alongside the growing rumors, they started to form a troubling pattern. Suddenly, isolated incidents seemed connected. Small details that once appeared meaningless now carried greater significance. Inside the foundation, uncertainty began spreading. Employees who admired Catherine's dedication found themselves wondering whether there was more happening behind the scenes than anyone realized. Conversations became increasingly cautious. Speculation remained private, yet concern continued to grow. The feeling that something important was being withheld became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, palace aides remained determined to maintain strict control over information, creating an atmosphere where every unanswered question generated 3 new ones. What nobody realized at the time was that these tensions were setting the stage for a completely different crisis. The concerns surrounding Charlotte were serious enough on their own, but they would soon become intertwined with a personal conflict that had been quietly building for years. Hidden grievances, unresolved rivalries, and old wounds were moving closer to the surface. And when they finally erupted, the consequences would extend far beyond a private family matter. But the chilling truth wasn't just about Charlotte's health. It was the unexpected confrontation that followed, one that would push long-simmering tensions into the open. No one expected the Duchess of Sussex to appear at the center of a growing royal controversy. Yet within days of whispers spreading through palace corridors, Meghan arrived carrying questions that many believed should never have been asked in public. The atmosphere surrounding the foundation event was already unusually fragile long before Meghan's arrival became the subject of whispered conversations. Officially, it was intended to be a routine engagement, another opportunity to highlight charitable initiatives and reinforce the image of stability that the royal family had worked so hard to maintain. But beneath that carefully protected surface, tensions were quietly accumulating. Catherine's recent struggles, the growing concerns surrounding Charlotte, and the unusual secrecy surrounding palace affairs had created an undercurrent of unease that few people could fully explain. Staff members sensed it. Advisors sensed it. Even those with limited access to royal affairs seemed aware that something important was unfolding behind closed doors. Despite the personal pressure she was reportedly facing, Catherine remained committed to attending. Those who worked closely with her understood the significance of that decision. She had always been viewed as someone who placed duty ahead of personal discomfort, someone willing to shoulder responsibility even during difficult moments. Yet this appearance felt different. There was an undeniable weight surrounding her presence, a sense that she was carrying concerns far greater than the public realized. Foundation employees who had watched recent developments unfold quietly admired her determination, but many also worried about the toll it was taking behind the scenes. Then came the arrival that nobody had fully anticipated. Meghan's presence immediately shifted the mood. For years, discussions surrounding the relationship between Meghan and other senior members of the royal family had generated endless speculation. Reports of disagreements, misunderstandings, and fractured trust had circulated repeatedly, but much of it remained hidden behind official statements and carefully controlled messaging. Now, suddenly, two figures often linked to those rumors found themselves occupying the same professional space at a moment when emotions throughout the institution were already running high. Staff members reportedly noticed the change almost immediately. Conversations that had flowed naturally became more cautious. Casual interactions carried an unexpected edge. Small exchanges that might have passed unnoticed under ordinary circumstances suddenly attracted attention because everyone seemed aware of the history hanging in the background. No confrontation occurred at first. No dramatic moment unfolded. Yet sometimes the strongest tension comes not from what is said, but from what remains unsaid. As the engagement continued, private disagreements that many believed had long been buried appeared to resurface beneath the surface. Observers described an increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere, where every interaction seemed layered with meaning. Senior aides became noticeably more attentive, monitoring developments while attempting to ensure that the event remained focused on its intended purpose. Their efforts reflected a growing concern that something unpredictable could happen if emotions continued escalating. Meanwhile, Foundation's employees found themselves caught in an increasingly difficult position. Many had devoted years to supporting charitable causes and community initiatives, not navigating the complexities of royal disputes. Yet rumors spread rapidly through offices, meeting rooms, and private conversations. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Why had Meghan chosen this moment to become involved? What concerns was she carrying? And why did so many people appear nervous about what might happen next? By the end of the engagement, uncertainty had evolved into something far more troubling. The sense that an important boundary was about to be crossed became impossible to ignore. Staff members exchanged worried observations. Advisors quietly reassessed potential risks. The fragile balance holding the situation together seemed weaker with every passing moment. What had begun as a routine appearance was slowly transforming into the opening chapter of a much larger conflict, one that threatened to expose wounds the monarchy had spent years trying to conceal. What began as awkward tension quickly evolved into something far more explosive. When Meghan decided to challenge Catherine directly, the room fell silent. Staff members who had gathered for an ordinary foundation briefing suddenly found themselves witnessing a confrontation that would leave even veteran palace employees speechless. For days, tension had been building beneath the surface. Questions surrounding Catherine's recent absences, concerns about Charlotte, and the growing unease that had settled across royal circles had already created an atmosphere filled with uncertainty. Yet, even those who sensed trouble ahead could not have predicted what would happen next. The foundation event had begun with the appearance of normality, but by this stage, normality was rapidly disappearing. The careful balance that palace aides had worked so hard to preserve was beginning to fracture. and everyone present could feel it. What transformed concern into controversy was the moment Meghan reportedly chose to raise questions that many believed belonged behind closed doors. According to accounts that later circulated among staff, the discussion began calmly enough. But as the conversation progressed, Meghan's remarks became increasingly direct. What had initially sounded like curiosity soon felt more like a challenge. The shift caught many people by surprise, because the setting itself demanded diplomacy and restraint. Instead, what unfolded created an atmosphere of growing discomfort that spread throughout the room. Catherine, by most accounts, appeared caught off guard. She had arrived carrying the weight of personal concerns that few fully understood. For weeks, she had been navigating intense private pressures while continuing to fulfill public responsibilities. Those closest to her knew the strain she was under, even if the details remained hidden from public view. Yet now, instead of finding support, she reportedly found herself facing questions in front of colleagues, staff members, and advisors who suddenly realized they were witnessing something far more serious than a routine exchange. Foundation employees watched carefully as the situation developed. Some later described a feeling of disbelief. Others spoke about an overwhelming sense of tension that seemed to grow with every passing moment. Nobody wanted to become part of a royal disagreement. Nobody wanted to witness the reopening of old divisions. Yet there they were, watching events unfold in real time as the distance between private conflict and public confrontation rapidly disappeared. Several senior aides reportedly exchanged concerned glances as the discussion intensified. They understood the risks better than anyone. Every word carried potential consequences. Every misunderstanding could create headlines. Every emotional reaction threatened to deepen divisions that had already troubled the royal family for years. Quiet efforts were made to redirect conversations and restore focus to the event itself, but the atmosphere had already changed. Once certain lines are crossed, it becomes difficult to return to where things began. What impressed many observers was Catherine's determination to remain composed despite the pressure. Rather than responding emotionally, she reportedly maintained the calm demeanor that had become one of her defining strengths. Yet maintaining composure did not make the situation easier. In some ways, it made it harder. The more measured her response appeared, the more uncomfortable the broader exchange seemed to become. Staff members could feel the growing imbalance. The tension was no longer hidden. It was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Meghan reportedly continued pressing the issue. Whatever concerns or frustrations she carried into the meeting appeared unresolved. The conversation moved beyond awkwardness and into territory that many present considered deeply uncomfortable. The emotional temperature continued rising, creating a sense that events were moving toward an unavoidable breaking point. Questions became sharper, reactions became more cautious, and throughout it all, uncertainty hung over the room like a gathering storm. By the time the briefing concluded, word had already begun spreading beyond those directly involved. Conversations erupted throughout Foundation offices. Staff members quietly shared accounts of what they had witnessed. Advisors rushed to assess potential fallout. Within hours, rumors were moving through royal circles at remarkable speed. What had happened was no longer viewed as a simple disagreement. It was becoming something much larger, something capable of reigniting tensions many believed had never truly disappeared. But, while Catherine maintained her composure, someone else was reaching a breaking point behind the scenes. By the time the reports reached Prince William, the damage had already been done. What he heard from aides that afternoon triggered a reaction few inside the palace had ever seen. The confrontation that had unsettled Foundation staff was no longer confined to whispered conversations and nervous speculation. Within hours, detailed accounts of the incident were making their way through royal channels, moving from office to office, advisor to advisor, until they eventually reached the one person many feared would take the matter most personally. William had spent years navigating public scrutiny, family tensions, and institutional pressures. He understood better than most that disagreements within the royal family often carried consequences far beyond the individuals involved. But according to those familiar with the aftermath, what he learned that day struck a particularly sensitive nerve. The briefing began almost immediately. Senior aides gathered information from everyone who had been present, attempting to piece together an accurate account of what had happened. Yet the more information they collected, the more complicated the situation became. Some described the exchange as an uncomfortable disagreement. Others portrayed it as a direct challenge that crossed an invisible line. Different witnesses focused on different details. Certain accounts emphasized Meghan's persistence. Others highlighted the growing discomfort among staff. The conflicting versions created confusion, but one conclusion appeared consistent across nearly every report. The atmosphere had deteriorated rapidly, and Catherine had found herself placed in an exceptionally difficult position. As William listened, frustration reportedly began building with every new detail. For weeks, he had been carrying private concerns about Charlotte while supporting Catherine through an increasingly demanding period. The pressure surrounding the family had already reached extraordinary levels. The last thing he needed was another source of turmoil, threatening to destabilize an already fragile situation. Yet now he was being told that a public confrontation had unfolded at precisely the moment when Catherine was facing some of the most challenging circumstances of recent months. Those closest to William have often described him as fiercely loyal to the people he loves. While he has developed a reputation for discipline and self-control, there has always been another side to his character, a deeply protective instinct that becomes impossible to ignore when family is involved. According to insiders, that instinct quickly took over. What might have been viewed as an unfortunate disagreement by others was reportedly seen by William as something much more serious. From his perspective, Catherine had been placed under unnecessary pressure at a moment when she was already carrying an enormous emotional burden. As concern for Catherine intensified, palace officials found themselves confronting an entirely new problem. The original incident had been difficult enough to manage. Now they faced the possibility of a broader crisis involving multiple senior members of the royal family. Communications teams began assessing potential risks. Advisors worked to determine whether rumors had already spread beyond internal circles. Every hour that passed increased the likelihood of leaks, speculation, and public scrutiny. The challenge was no longer simply understanding what had happened. The challenge was preventing the situation from spiraling further out of control. Urgent meetings were reportedly called throughout the day. Senior staff reviewed possible responses, discussed damage control strategies, and attempted to anticipate the next stage of the fallout. Yet uncertainty remained the dominant emotion. Nobody could predict how events would develop. Nobody could guarantee that tensions would remain contained. The more discussions took place behind closed doors, the clearer it became that the foundation confrontation was merely one chapter in a much larger story. Meanwhile, fears of another public royal feud began spreading throughout palace circles. Those memories were still fresh. Previous divisions had generated years of headlines, speculation, and public debate. The institution had spent enormous effort attempting to move beyond those conflicts. Now there was growing concern that old wounds were reopening at precisely the wrong moment. Staff members worried about the impact on charitable work. Advisors worried about the monarchy's image. Senior officials worried about trust, unity, and stability. What troubled many insiders most was the sense that this crisis was no longer driven by a single disagreement. It was becoming a collision between unresolved history and present-day pressures. Every frustration seemed connected to something deeper. Every reaction carried echoes of past conflicts. And as William's anger continued to grow behind the scenes, palace officials increasingly realized they were confronting something far larger than anyone had anticipated. Yet William's anger was only the beginning, because the palace now faced a crisis threatening the very foundation of its carefully managed image. For foundation employees, the confrontation became impossible to ignore. They had joined to support charitable causes, not to find themselves trapped between two competing royal camps. In the days that followed William's explosive reaction behind closed doors, the atmosphere inside the foundation changed dramatically. What had once been an organization focused on service, community outreach, and long-term charitable goals suddenly found itself consumed by uncertainty. Conversations that previously centered on projects, partnerships, and fundraising efforts were now overshadowed by a single topic. Everywhere people turned, questions lingered. Staff members who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand struggled to process what they had seen, while those who had only heard fragments of the story found themselves piecing together details through whispers and speculation. The uncertainty became increasingly difficult to escape. Employees understood that royal organizations often operated under intense public scrutiny, but this felt different. This was no longer a distant family disagreement occurring behind palace gates. The consequences were now being felt within the workplace itself. People who had spent years building careers around charitable service suddenly found themselves navigating an environment clouded by tension. Every meeting seemed heavier. Every conversation felt more cautious. The sense of stability that had once defined the foundation was beginning to erode. As rumors spread, uncomfortable questions about loyalty started emerging. Nobody openly demanded that employees choose sides, yet many felt caught in an impossible position. Catherine had earned deep respect throughout the organization for her commitment, professionalism, and genuine investment in charitable work. At the same time, the broader royal dispute carried emotional and historical complexities that few fully understood. Staff members found themselves wondering how they were expected to move forward when the people at the center of the conflict represented such powerful and influential figures. The emotional toll quickly became visible. Internal morale began suffering as uncertainty replaced confidence. Employees who had once approached their work with enthusiasm now found themselves distracted by concerns they could not control. Some worried about the foundation's future. Others worried about how the controversy might affect ongoing projects. Many simply feared becoming unwilling participants in a conflict that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. The contrast was striking. An organization dedicated to helping others was now struggling to protect itself from the consequences of a deeply personal royal dispute. Meanwhile, those who had directly witnessed the confrontation quietly shared their concerns with trusted colleagues. No official reports were being circulated, yet stories traveled quickly. Small details were discussed repeatedly. Different interpretations emerged. Every retelling seemed to add another layer of intrigue. What had originally been described as an uncomfortable exchange was increasingly viewed as a defining moment in a much larger conflict. With every new conversation, the incident appeared more significant than before. Senior management recognized the danger almost immediately. Determined to prevent further disruption, leaders within the organization attempted to restore calm. Meetings were held, reassurances were offered. Staff were encouraged to remain focused on the foundation's mission. Yet the challenge proved far more difficult than anyone expected. The controversy had already become intertwined with daily operations. Simply telling employees to move on could not erase the questions that continued hanging over the organization. As the days passed, charitable work itself began losing visibility beneath the weight of the unfolding drama. Important initiatives that normally would have received attention struggled to break through the growing noise surrounding the controversy. Discussions that should have celebrated achievements instead drifted back toward royal tensions. The foundation's purpose remained unchanged, but public interest was increasingly shifting elsewhere. Then another problem emerged. Media inquiries began arriving. At first, they were limited and carefully worded. Journalists sought clarification. Commentators requested information. Reporters looked for confirmation regarding rumors that had already begun circulating beyond foundation offices. But with each inquiry, the reality became harder to ignore. The story was no longer confined to private conversations among staff and advisors. It was moving outward, gathering momentum as it went. Inside the organization, tension spread rapidly. Employees grew more cautious about what they said and to whom they said it. Managers worried about leaks. Advisors worried about headlines. Senior officials worried about protecting both the institution and the individuals caught at the center of the storm. What had started as a single confrontation had evolved into a crisis touching every corner of the foundation. And as anxiety continued rising behind the scenes, many sensed that the most difficult chapter had yet to begin. As pressure mounted inside the foundation, the story was preparing to escape palace walls and enter the public arena. The moment whispers reached royal correspondents, palace officials knew they were racing against time. Controlling the narrative had suddenly become their most urgent mission. What had begun as a tense confrontation inside the foundation was now evolving into something far more dangerous. For days, palace officials had worked under the assumption that the incident could be managed internally. They believed the controversy would remain confined to private conversations, staff discussions, and a handful of concerned advisors. But the arrival of media interest changed everything. Once royal correspondents started asking questions, the situation entered an entirely different phase. The challenge was no longer simply containing internal fallout. The challenge was preventing a growing controversy from becoming a public spectacle capable of dominating headlines for weeks. The response was immediate. Communications teams were mobilized as soon as it became clear that journalists were actively pursuing details. Senior officials understood the risks better than anyone. In the modern royal era, perception can be almost as important as reality. Every unanswered question creates room for speculation. Every rumor left unchecked gains strength. Every delay invites new interpretations. Palace communications staff suddenly found themselves under enormous pressure to navigate a rapidly changing situation without fueling the very story they were trying to control. Behind closed doors, emergency strategy discussions began unfolding. Advisors examined every possible scenario. Some argued for silence. Others favored carefully crafted responses designed to reduce speculation. Several officials reportedly worried that any public comment might accidentally validate rumors that had not yet been confirmed. The debate itself reflected the seriousness of the crisis. There was no obvious solution. Every option carried risks. Every decision seemed capable of making the situation either better or significantly worse. Meanwhile, royal aides worked tirelessly to coordinate messaging across different parts of the institution. Consistency became the priority. Officials knew that conflicting statements would only deepen public curiosity and intensify media scrutiny. The challenge, however, was that the controversy touched multiple people, multiple perspectives, and multiple layers of royal relationships. Maintaining a unified approach proved far more complicated than many had anticipated. As palace officials struggled to regain control, media speculation continued growing. Commentators began connecting the confrontation to previous royal tensions. Old disagreements resurfaced in public discussions. Historical divisions were suddenly being re-examined through the lens of the latest controversy. What had once been separate stories started merging into a larger narrative about family conflict, institutional pressure, and unresolved grievances. The more attention the story received, the harder it became to separate fact from assumption. Public appearances quickly became another source of concern. Every upcoming engagement was reviewed carefully. Advisors understood that even the smallest interaction could generate headlines. A brief conversation, a missed appearance, or a seemingly insignificant decision might be interpreted as evidence supporting one theory or another. The pressure surrounding routine royal duties increased dramatically. Activities that would normally pass unnoticed were now being scrutinized for hidden meaning. Amid the growing storm, Catherine reportedly remained focused on her responsibilities. Those around her understood the extraordinary pressure she was facing. She was managing personal concerns, navigating public expectations, and dealing with the fallout from an increasingly public controversy. Yet despite those challenges, she continued projecting determination and professionalism. For supporters within the palace, her ability to remain steady became a source of reassurance during a period defined by uncertainty. Elsewhere, Meghan's camp was reportedly approaching the situation differently. Various interpretations of the incident continued circulating, and different perspectives emerged regarding what had happened and why. These differing narratives only complicated efforts to establish a clear understanding of events. As competing versions spread, divisions that had long existed beneath the surface became increasingly visible. That visibility created a new problem for palace officials. The deeper they looked into the situation, the harder it became to maintain the appearance of unity. The institution had spent years attempting to present stability despite private challenges. Now those challenges were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Staff members noticed it. Journalists noticed it. Even casual observers began sensing that something larger was unfolding behind the scenes. And while advisors continued crafting statements, coordinating responses, and searching for ways to calm the growing storm, another conflict was quietly gathering strength away from public view. It was more personal, more emotional, and potentially far more explosive than anything the media had yet discovered. But while advisors worked to calm the storm, a far more personal battle was unfolding between William and those he believed had crossed a line. For years, William had been expected to remain calm, disciplined, and measured. This time, however, those closest to him sensed that patience had finally run out. The pressure had been building for weeks, perhaps even months. Concerns surrounding Charlotte, the emotional strain carried by Catherine, the confrontation inside the foundation, and the growing media storm had combined into something far more personal than a simple public relations crisis. While palace officials focused on headlines and damage control, William's attention was fixed elsewhere. He was no longer thinking primarily about public perception. He was thinking about family. More specifically, he was thinking about Catherine and the increasingly difficult position in which she had been placed. According to insiders, the future king had reached a point where frustration was no longer something he could quietly set aside. For years, he had accepted the burdens that came with royal life. He had endured criticism, speculation, and endless scrutiny. He had learned to navigate difficult situations with restraint, because that was what duty demanded. Yet those who knew him best reportedly noticed a significant change in recent days. The calm exterior remained, but underneath it was a level of determination that few had witnessed before. The controversy had crossed into territory he considered deeply personal. Senior advisors soon found themselves facing difficult conversations. William reportedly wanted answers. He wanted clarity regarding how the situation had been allowed to escalate. He wanted to understand why warning signs had not been addressed sooner. Most importantly, he wanted reassurance that Catherine would not be placed in a similar position again. What began as frustration quickly evolved into something more focused and deliberate. The discussion was no longer centered on assigning blame. It was centered on preventing further damage. As these conversations unfolded, William's priorities became increasingly clear. Protecting Catherine moved to the center of every decision. Those close to the situation described a shift in his thinking. Earlier concerns about public reaction, media narratives, and institutional optics became secondary. His primary concern was the well-being of the woman who had spent years supporting both the monarchy and their family through immense challenges. The more he reflected on recent events, the more determined he reportedly became to ensure that her interests remained protected moving forward. That determination had consequences. Long-standing tensions that had remained beneath the surface for years began resurfacing with renewed force. Old disagreements were suddenly viewed through a different lens. Past conflicts that many believed had faded into history were revisited as emotions intensified. The result was a growing sense that unresolved issues had finally reached a breaking point. What had once been manageable differences now appeared far more serious. Within royal circles, trust between different camps continued deteriorating. The foundation confrontation had already exposed cracks that many insiders knew existed but rarely discussed openly. Now those cracks were widening. Conversations became more guarded. Relationships grew increasingly strained. The confidence that once allowed various sides to cooperate despite disagreements seemed to be disappearing. Every interaction carried greater weight because nobody could be certain where loyalties truly stood. At the center of everything remained Catherine. The more pressure she faced, the more determined William appeared to become. Those around him understood that this was no longer merely about one disagreement or one difficult encounter. It was about a pattern of events that had gradually convinced him that stronger boundaries might be necessary. Every decision he considered seemed connected to a single objective: ensuring that Catherine would not have to endure another experience like the one that had sparked the current crisis. Meanwhile, palace insiders watched developments with growing concern. Some worried that relationships damaged during this period might never fully recover. Others feared that private tensions could eventually spill further into public view. There was an increasing sense that the monarchy had reached a pivotal moment. The choices made now would influence not only the immediate crisis but also the future dynamics of the royal family itself. As emotions intensified, the atmosphere surrounding the institution became heavier than ever. Advisors continued searching for solutions. Family members grappled with difficult realities. Long-standing grievances collided with present-day pressures, creating a situation that felt increasingly impossible to contain. And as William's resolve strengthened and divisions deepened, a larger question began emerging from the chaos that neither the palace nor the public could ignore for much longer. And as emotions reached their peak, the monarchy found itself facing a question that could no longer be avoided. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but its consequences threatened to linger for years. What happened that day exposed fractures within the royal family that could no longer remain hidden. In the weeks that followed, the fallout continued rippling through royal circles with remarkable force. What had begun as a single confrontation inside a foundation event evolved into a defining moment that many insiders believed would influence relationships for years to come. The incident itself may have been brief, but its impact reached far beyond those who directly witnessed it. Conversations continued behind closed doors. Advisors remained engaged in damage control. Family members found themselves confronting difficult questions about trust, loyalty, and the future. The deeper palace officials examined the situation, the clearer it became that this was never simply about one disagreement. It was about tensions that had been quietly accumulating beneath the surface for a very long time. As public discussion intensified, Catherine's position appeared to strengthen. Sympathy grew among those who viewed her as someone caught in the center of circumstances she had not created. Throughout the controversy, she had remained focused on responsibility rather than retaliation. That restraint earned respect from many observers. While speculation continued swirling around every aspect of the confrontation, Catherine's measured response became one of the few points on which supporters consistently focused. In a period marked by conflict and uncertainty, her determination to remain composed stood in sharp contrast to the chaos surrounding her. At the same time, William emerged from the crisis more protective than ever. Those closest to him reportedly recognized a lasting shift in perspective. The events surrounding Catherine and Charlotte had reinforced priorities that were already deeply important to him. Protecting his family was no longer simply one responsibility among many. It had become the lens through which every major decision would be viewed. Palace insiders suggested that the experience left a lasting impression, one that would continue shaping his approach to both personal and institutional challenges moving forward. Meanwhile, debate surrounding Meghan's actions showed no signs of fading. Different interpretations continued circulating throughout royal circles and beyond. Some believed important concerns had been raised. Others viewed the confrontation as a serious mistake that escalated tensions unnecessarily. The lack of consensus only ensured that discussions remained active long after the original incident ended. Every new report seemed to generate fresh questions rather than definitive answers. As a result, the controversy became less about a single moment and more about what that moment represented. Foundation employees also continued reflecting on what they had witnessed. For many, it remained one of the most extraordinary experiences of their professional lives. They had entered the organization with a commitment to charitable work and public service. Instead, they found themselves observing an event that would become the subject of widespread discussion throughout royal and media circles. Long after headlines moved on, memories of that day continued influencing conversations within the organization. Perhaps the most significant consequence was the effect on relationships themselves. Certain divisions that had once been manageable now appeared deeper than ever. Trust became more difficult to rebuild. Communication became more complicated. Even where reconciliation remained possible, the path forward seemed uncertain. Many palace insiders privately acknowledged that some relationships had been permanently altered by the events that unfolded during this period. Yet despite everything that had happened, one question remained unanswered. Could reconciliation ever truly occur? Some believed time would eventually heal the damage. Others feared the wounds had become too deep. The uncertainty surrounding that question reflected a broader uncertainty facing the monarchy itself. As one chapter closed, another appeared ready to begin. The institution that had weathered countless storms throughout its history now faced a new reality shaped by changing relationships, evolving priorities, and unresolved tensions. And so the monarchy moved forward carrying both strength and vulnerability. The immediate crisis may have passed, but its lessons remained. Every family has moments that reveal hidden truths. Every institution faces challenges that test its foundations. What happened during those difficult days revealed not only the pressures facing the royal family but also the resilience required to endure them. Whether the divisions exposed by the confrontation eventually heal or continue widening remains unknown. What is certain is that the consequences will not be forgotten anytime soon. Because behind every royal confrontation lies a deeper struggle for influence, loyalty, and legacy, and this battle may be far from over. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.